After my mother-in-law's funeral, my broke husband inherited $379 million. He filed for divorce immediately, saying, "You were just a placeholder." I said nothing. Days later, his mom's lawyer called him in, and the look on his face when he heard the real will was priceless. The phone call came at the worst possible time. The funeral was just over and I was barely holding it together. Grief wasn't something I expected to feel for a woman who had made my life difficult, but there I was, standing in the cold parking lot, trying to catch my breath after hearing the news that would change everything. My husband, Tyler, stood by my side, his face unreadable. But it was his words that shattered everything I thought I knew about our life together. "You know, I always thought you'd be more useful than just a placeholder," he said, his voice flat as he turned to walk away. I stood there, stunned, unable to process the cruelty in his tone. He had just inherited a fortune, $379 million to be exact, and the first thing he did was file for divorce. The woman I thought I knew, my husband, had turned into someone else entirely. Curious about how this journey unfolds? Subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and transformation. It's free and keeps you connected to the heart of each story. Let's explore what's next together. It didn't make sense. How could he be so cold? After everything we'd been through together, the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, I was nothing more than a placeholder? A moment of silence followed his words, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The gravity of what was happening hit me like a ton of bricks and I could barely breathe. I should have said something, but I knew deep down I wasn't in the right state to even form words. What was left to say? The only sound around me was the soft rustling of the wind, brushing past the mourners, all oblivious to the storm that was brewing in my chest. His cold dismissal was like a slap in the face. A simple, brutal declaration. And for a split second I considered screaming, telling him everything I thought of him, of how much I had done for him. But I said nothing. Not because I couldn't, but because I knew what came next would be even worse than anything I could shout in that moment. Something bigger was coming. Something I couldn't see yet, but I knew was out there waiting to strike. Tyler's inheritance had always been a topic of conversation, but I never imagined that the minute his mother passed away, his true nature would rise to the surface. For years we had struggled financially. I had worked overtime, taken on extra jobs, and even sacrificed my own happiness just to keep our home afloat. I stood by him through everything, through the mounting debt, the job losses, the broken promises. I never once questioned whether he appreciated it. He had told me he did and I believed him. Till now. Now standing outside the church, I felt the weight of his words sinking in. Tyler had always been quick to praise me when things went well, but when things fell apart it was always my fault. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could ignore the way he treated me, always so distant, always so indifferent. But today his cruelty had become undeniable. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about everything. It was about how I had been nothing more than a pawn in his life, a tool to be used when convenient. And in that moment, standing in the parking lot of a church, my entire world cracked open. But I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I just stood there, silent, my thoughts racing. There was one thing I knew for certain. Tyler had no idea what he had just done. He thought he could walk away, taking everything he wanted without consequences. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. The drive home was a blur. Tyler's words replayed in my mind over and over. "You were just a placeholder." How many years had I spent as that? How many years had I been fooling myself into thinking that things could get better, that we could make it through this rough patch? His cruelty didn't just break my heart. It shattered the image I had of him. The person I thought I married didn't exist anymore. This was a stranger. A man who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone to something greater. As I pulled into the driveway, the reality of what was happening sank in deeper. Tyler had everything now. Money, freedom, power, and I had nothing. Or at least that's what I thought. But there was something else I hadn't considered. Something that had been waiting beneath the surface for years. A feeling I hadn't let myself acknowledge until now. Rage. It bubbled up inside me, quiet at first, but then growing stronger with every thought of his betrayal. I had always thought revenge was a futile emotion. Something only petty people indulged in. But now I saw it for what it was. A way to reclaim control. Tyler had taken everything from me. My love, my devotion, my trust. And he thought he could walk away without a second thought. He thought he could take the money, take the life we built together, and leave me behind. But he was wrong. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not ever. Tyler thought he had won. He thought the divorce was the end of it, that his inheritance would be enough to fix everything. But what he didn't know was that his mother's will had a twist in it, one he would never see coming. As I sat in the car, my hands clenched around the steering wheel, I realized something. I had one thing Tyler didn't. I had the truth. And that truth was about to turn his life upside down. The next few days passed in a haze of emotions. Tyler was distant, almost relieved by the divorce papers, and I was left alone to process everything. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't done with him. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to be the placeholder anymore. I wasn't going to let him get away with what he'd done to me. And as I sat in my living room that night, the phone rang again. This time it was a call from the lawyer handling his mother's estate. "There's something you need to hear," she said. My pulse quickened and I felt my stomach flip. What was she talking about? What was in the will? Her next words were like a slap in the face. The real will had yet to be revealed to Tyler, and it was about to turn everything he thought he knew upside down. The shock on his face when he heard what his mother had really left him was going to be priceless. And I would be there to watch it all unfold. The days after Tyler's call were a blur. I sat in our empty house, the silence ringing in my ears. Our home, once filled with laughter, love, and shared dreams, now felt foreign to me. It was a place of ghosts, haunted by memories of what I had thought was a life built on love and partnership. I kept replaying his words in my head, the brutal, careless statement, "You were just a placeholder." Each time I thought I was getting better, the weight of it pressed down harder. I could still remember when we first met. Tyler had been charismatic, charming in that way that only people with a touch of arrogance could be. He had a way with words that made you believe in the impossible. His smile was infectious, and for the first time I felt like I had found someone who truly understood me. I had been young and naive, and he had been everything I had wanted in a partner. Handsome, confident, and just a little bit mysterious. It didn't take long for me to fall in love with him, and when we got married, I thought I had found my happily ever after. At first it wasn't perfect, but we made it work. We struggled, financially and emotionally, but there was always hope. We talked about our future, about the house we'd buy, the vacations we'd take, and the family we wanted to raise. Tyler promised me that we would build something lasting, that together we could make it through anything. And I believed him. But as the years passed, things began to change. Tyler's dreams seemed to fade, replaced by a sense of complacency. He stopped working as hard, stopped striving for more, and his once bright ambition was replaced by a passive attitude. The financial strain grew and I found myself working more hours, picking up the slack, doing everything I could to keep us afloat. I didn't mind at first. I loved him after all. I believed in us. But as the months turned into years, I began to notice a shift in him. He started to withdraw, emotionally distant even when we were in the same room. It was subtle at first, just small things. A lack of interest in my day, an absent-minded comment here and there, the occasional remark about how hard things were. But as time went on, it became more apparent. Tyler wasn't the man I had married anymore. He wasn't even the man I thought I knew. Despite all of this, I kept pushing forward. I told myself that our love was worth it, that I just had to try harder, be more patient. But Tyler's indifference grew. His gratitude for everything I did for him seemed to vanish, replaced by a quiet resentment. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about me. The woman who had once been his equal partner now felt like nothing more than a tool to keep him afloat. I had become a convenience. And then his mother's passing changed everything. At first Tyler seemed numb, he didn't react the way I thought he would. But that wasn't what was most shocking. It was what happened after the funeral that opened my eyes to who he really was. I never expected him to be so ruthless, so callous. The inheritance was more than just money. It was a symbol of everything he had been waiting for. And as soon as the lawyer confirmed it, Tyler's demeanor shifted. He no longer needed me. He had everything he wanted now. His mother's fortune, the freedom to do whatever he wanted. And I, his wife of nearly a decade, was no longer necessary. I felt the anger rising in me, but it wasn't just anger. It was disbelief. How could he be so heartless? After everything we had been through, everything I had sacrificed for him, he could turn on me like this? I had never seen him so cold. I had always known there was a side of him that was selfish, but this was something darker. And now, with that divorce declaration hanging over me like a sword, I realized just how much I had misjudged him. I had given him everything, my time, my energy, my love, and he had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. I sat in that empty house, the walls closing in around me, feeling a mix of betrayal and fear. The future I had envisioned, our future, was gone, vanished in an instant. But even as the sting of Tyler's words settled in, something shifted in me. I wasn't going to let him have the last word. He thought he could toss me aside like a worn-out shoe, but I wasn't going to let him. Not after everything I had given him. I spent the next few days in a fog, barely able to process the reality of the situation. I went through the motions, moving from one task to the next like a robot, but inside my mind was racing. Tyler's inheritance, his cold dismissal of me, the way he spoke of me like I was disposable. It was too much. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the way he had so easily filed for divorce, his tone casual, almost bored, like it was just another task on his list. And then the worst part, he hadn't even cared to explain why, to give me any sense of closure. I had been nothing more than a placeholder. But that's when it hit me. The real betrayal wasn't just in the divorce papers. It was in the fact that he had never seen me for who I truly was. I wasn't just his wife, his partner in life. I was the one who had always carried the weight of everything for him. The financial burden, the emotional labor, the household responsibilities. And now, when he had everything he ever wanted, I was just another casualty of his greed. The anger bubbled up again, stronger this time. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything while I was left in the dust. No, if he thought he had won, if he thought he could just move on without consequences, he was gravely mistaken. It wasn't about the money, it was about me. It was about the fact that he had taken me for granted, underestimated me, and assumed that I would just accept his betrayal without a second thought. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the woman who would quietly accept being treated like a second-class citizen. I had the power now. I had the knowledge and I had a plan. And Tyler had no idea what was coming for him. The real Will was out there, and I wasn't going to sit idly by and watch him claim it without a fight. If he thought he could discard me so easily, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. There was more to this story than he realized. And now I was going to make sure he learned the hard way that you can't just walk away from someone you've used and discarded. Not without facing the consequences. The days that followed Tyler's betrayal were some of the hardest I've ever had to face. The house felt empty, not just because of the absence of his presence, but because it felt like he had taken everything I had built with him. My thoughts were a constant whirlwind, constantly going back to that moment in the parking lot after his mother's funeral, where everything shifted. Every corner of our home, every little detail felt like a reminder of everything that had fallen apart. It wasn't just that I had lost my husband, it was that I had lost myself. I tried to occupy my mind with the day-to-day. The bills, the errands, even the mundane tasks like picking up groceries or taking care of the dog. But each step felt like a form of self-torture. I found myself replaying Tyler's words over and over in my head. You were just a placeholder. The weight of them crushed me, but I also knew that somewhere deep inside, it lit a fire in me that I wasn't ready to acknowledge. It wasn't just about what he said, it was about what he hadn't said. He hadn't even looked at me as someone worth fighting for. The more I sat with the reality of it, the more the anger built up. The memories of everything I had done for him, of how I had supported him through thick and thin, flooded my mind. I remembered how when we first met, Tyler had promised me a life of partnership. A life where we were equal. But those promises had evaporated with his mother's death. The moment the inheritance arrived, I wasn't even considered a part of the equation. I had become nothing more than a means to an end for him. But now, as I sat in the quiet of our home, I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Clarity. Tyler thought he had won. He thought he could just cut me out of his life and walk away with everything. He thought the money would fix all his problems. But as I thought more about it, the more I realized that he had made a huge mistake. He had underestimated me. I had given everything for him. Everything. But I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to just be the victim of his callousness. If Tyler thought he could discard me like a broken toy, he had another thing coming. But I also knew that this wasn't going to be some impulsive act of revenge. It had to be calculated. It had to be something that would force him to see what he had thrown away. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to think clearly. I was no longer caught in the suffocating fog of grief and betrayal. I had been so focused on making him see how much I had sacrificed, how much I had loved him, but I wasn't going to do that anymore. I wasn't going to beg for anything. What I needed to do now was make him understand exactly how wrong he was. But where to start? The will. That was the key. His mother had known what he was like, had known how he had treated me, and I was sure she had made provisions for me in the inheritance. Tyler had assumed that he would get everything. The house. The money. The future. He thought he had everything in his hands, but I knew better. I had seen enough of his mother's generosity to know that she wouldn't have left me high and dry. There had to be a twist in that will that would turn the tables on him. The problem was I had no idea what the contents were. Yet. I started to piece together my plan. It wasn't just about the money. I wasn't interested in being part of the fortune. I just wanted to prove to him that he had no idea what he was messing with. He thought that with the inheritance he would be able to live his life on his terms, that I would be left in the dust. But what he didn't know was that the real power wasn't in the money. It was in the fact that I knew how to play the game. And right now I was playing for keeps. The first step was getting in touch with the lawyer. I had to find out what the will actually said. But I couldn't just barge in and ask. I had to be strategic, methodical. I couldn't afford to look desperate or angry. That would give Tyler exactly what he wanted. He would see me as weak. No, I had to be calm, collected, and in control. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about the inheritance, the law, and how wills worked. I knew Tyler would be expecting the whole process to go smoothly, that his mother's estate would be handed over to him without any hiccups. But I was about to throw a wrench in that plan. And I wasn't going to stop there. I had a growing sense that something wasn't quite right. Tyler's behavior was erratic, his moods shifting like the tides. He seemed distracted more than usual. It was as if the weight of the inheritance was sinking in, and he was beginning to realize that things weren't going to be as easy as he thought. His eyes constantly darted to his phone, and when he thought I wasn't looking he would mutter under his breath as if unsure of what was coming next. I knew something was off. He wasn't the confident, arrogant man I once knew. There was a vulnerability to him now that made me wonder if he was starting to question whether he had made the right choice in tossing me aside. That's when it hit me, I wasn't the only one in the dark. Tyler thought the will was going to give him everything. But he had no idea that the true contents of it might just destroy his carefully constructed life. I could feel it now, like the calm before a storm. The tension was building and I wasn't sure whether I was ready for the fallout. But I couldn't back down now. I had to know. I had to know what was in that will. And whatever it was, it had the power to change everything. As I prepared for the next steps, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Tyler thought he had the upper hand, but I knew better. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. And when the truth finally came to light, Tyler would see exactly what I had always been. More than just a placeholder. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing. The game had only just begun. As I sat in my living room, the weight of my decision began to settle in. The realization that I was about to take matters into my own hands felt both terrifying and empowering. Tyler thought he had everything figured out. The money, the freedom, the power. But what he didn't understand was that the game wasn't over. I wasn't just going to walk away with my head down and let him enjoy his newfound riches while I was left with nothing. If he wanted to discard me, I was going to make sure he'd regret it. I knew that revenge wasn't something I had ever thought of before. I had always prided myself on being a peaceful person, someone who tried to make the best out of any situation. But this wasn't just any situation. Tyler had crossed a line, and now it was time for him to understand that there were consequences to his actions. The more I thought about it, the more my resolve solidified. This wasn't about just taking back what was mine. It was about showing him the consequences of his arrogance. The first step in my plan was getting access to the will. I had already been in touch with his mother's lawyer, who seemed surprised when I reached out. I had no idea what kind of relationship they had, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. I played the part of the confused, hurt wife perfectly, asking for clarification on the inheritance, mentioning that Tyler had been acting strangely since the funeral. I could sense the hesitation in the lawyer's voice as she told me she needed to check a few things before she could discuss any details. But I wasn't waiting around for her to get back to me. I knew how to move quickly, how to manipulate situations in my favor. While I waited for her response, I began researching everything I could about the estate. I knew Tyler would be expecting to receive the money and the property without any issues. But what if there was a catch? What if there was something hidden in the will that he wasn't expecting? I needed to find out what I could whatever would give me the leverage to turn the tables on him. I started looking through old family documents, anything I could get my hands on. There were photos, notes, legal papers scattered around the house. At first, I thought I was looking for nothing more than clues to the will's contents. But as I dug deeper, I realized I was also finding pieces of a much bigger picture. Tyler's mother had been meticulous about her estate. She had planned everything down to the smallest detail, and as I began to unravel these details, I started to piece together the reality of what was happening. Tyler was not going to get away with this. One afternoon, as I sifted through a pile of old papers in the study, I came across something that made my heart race. A legal document that mentioned a trust fund. I hadn't heard anything about this before, and immediately my curiosity piqued. It was clear that this was part of the estate, but what was it for? Who was the beneficiary? The document was vague, but it was enough to spark my next move. I knew I had to act fast. Tyler was becoming more and more confident in his position. He had already begun making plans for his new life, thinking that he had won. He started calling his friends, making future arrangements with the newfound wealth, discussing extravagant trips and new investments. He was already starting to behave like he had nothing to worry about, which only made me more determined to keep him in the dark. I decided to make my move. I reached out to the lawyer again, but this time I played my hand differently. I didn't ask for clarity on the inheritance, I demanded it. I told her that I needed answers now, that I couldn't move forward with the divorce until I understood the full extent of my rights. I made sure to mention that Tyler had been acting strangely, that I believed there was more to his mother's will than anyone was letting on. The lawyer was quick to respond, telling me she needed to schedule a meeting to go over the details. That was all I needed. I had a chance to get the full picture, to see if there was something in the will that would give me the leverage I needed. But I couldn't go in unprepared. I spent the next few days going over everything I knew about Tyler's mother. I needed to understand the woman behind the estate, the one who had raised him and shaped the man he had become. The more I learned, the more I realized just how much she had seen through him. Tyler had always been a self-serving man, but his mother had always kept a watchful eye on him. She knew him better than anyone. And that, I realized, was my advantage. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, I was ready. I dressed carefully, my appearance professional yet understated, as if I were just a woman seeking clarification. But inside I was a storm ready to break. I walked into the lawyer's office, my heart pounding in my chest. The lawyer greeted me with a polite smile, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. She had no idea what she was dealing with. She began to speak about the estate, the assets, the property. But I wasn't listening. Not entirely. I was waiting for the moment when the truth would reveal itself. When she finally mentioned the trust fund, my pulse quickened. It wasn't just money, it was a foundation. A foundation that Tyler had no idea existed. His mother had left specific instructions that the bulk of her estate would go into the trust, to be distributed only under certain conditions. Tyler wasn't going to get a dime of it unless he met those conditions. The conditions were clear. Tyler had to show that he had changed, that he was no longer the same selfish, arrogant man he had been. If he failed to meet these expectations, the money would go to me. I had been named as the beneficiary of the trust. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, trying to mask the smile threatening to break out across my face. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment I could take back what he thought he had stolen from me. The lawyer handed me the full details of the will, and I absorbed every word, savoring the knowledge I had just gained. Tyler wasn't going to walk away with everything. Not if I had anything to say about it. He thought he had the upper hand. But what he didn't know was that the real power had always been with me. And now, I had the ammunition I needed to make sure he would never forget who he had crossed. I left the lawyer's office with a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about getting back at Tyler. It was about regaining my life, my dignity, and my power. Tyler had made a grave mistake thinking that he could discard me so easily. And now, I was going to make sure he paid the price for it. The weeks that followed my meeting with the lawyer felt like an eternity. The knowledge that I held the key to everything Tyler had worked so hard to acquire. His inheritance, his freedom, his future, was both exhilarating and terrifying. But the fear didn't last long. What started as a quiet determination soon blossomed into a full-blown mission. I wasn't going to allow Tyler to have it all without facing the consequences. This time he would see the cost of his actions. Tyler, completely oblivious to the changes brewing under the surface, went about his life as if everything was going according to plan. He continued to make plans for trips, business deals, and new investments, all while brushing aside the divorce proceedings. His confidence seemed unshakable. He truly believed he had won. But as I watched him go about his daily life, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. I was no longer the desperate woman clinging to a marriage that was falling apart. I was in control now, and I had a plan. I hadn't told anyone, friends, family, not even my closest confidants, about what I had discovered. The trust fund, the conditions tied to Tyler's inheritance, the power I now held over him. It was my secret, and I wasn't about to let it slip. Not yet. I had one more card to play, and I needed to make sure it was played at just the right moment. And that moment came sooner than I expected. It was a late evening when I received the call that would change everything. It was from the lawyer handling the estate, the same one who had disclosed the shocking details of the will. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice more serious than I had ever heard it. "The trust has been activated. Tyler is about to be notified." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The will had been clear, the stipulations ironclad. If Tyler didn't meet the requirements, the money would not go to him. It would go to me. And now, with the trust activated, Tyler was about to find out that the life he had imagined for himself was slipping away, piece by piece. I told the lawyer to go ahead with the process. There was no turning back now. As I hung up, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. Tyler thought he was the one in control, that his new wealth would solve all his problems. But he had never understood the game we were playing. And now it was about to get personal. The next few days were a blur. I focused on my own life, finalizing the divorce, preparing for the future. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about Tyler. He had no idea what was coming. How would he react when he found out? Would he panic? Would he try to fight back? I couldn't be sure, but what I knew for certain was that the power had shifted. He was no longer in control. And then the day arrived. I received another call, this time from the lawyer's office, confirming that Tyler had been summoned to meet with her regarding the will. She didn't say much more, but I didn't need her to. I already knew what was about to unfold. Tyler would walk into that meeting expecting the inheritance to be handed to him without question. But instead, he would be confronted with the harsh truth that his mother had known exactly who he was, and she had made sure he would never have easy access to her fortune unless he changed. He hadn't. He wouldn't. I couldn't help but imagine his reaction. Would he be shocked? Would he be furious? He had been so certain that he was untouchable, that nothing could come between him and what he believed was rightfully his. But the truth would soon break through his arrogance, and I was going to be there to watch it. The night before his meeting with the lawyer, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, thinking of every possible outcome. Would Tyler walk in with the same cocky attitude he always had? Would he demand what he felt was owed to him, or would he be forced to face the consequences of his actions? The next day, I followed my usual routine, trying to stay calm, but my heart raced in anticipation. I knew that the moment Tyler stepped into that office, everything would change. I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized that he wasn't going to walk away from this as the winner. I waited for hours, not knowing exactly when the meeting would conclude. Finally, just as I was starting to lose track of time, I got a call from the lawyer's office. It was the moment I had been waiting for. "He's just left," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of satisfaction and something else, almost as if she was enjoying this too. "You'll want to hear this." I braced myself. "Tell me everything." The lawyer hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Tyler is furious. He didn't expect any of this. His entire plan fell apart the minute he walked into that office." She paused, and I could hear the slight smile in her voice. "He thought he had everything figured out. But the truth is, he's going to have to prove that he's changed, or he'll never see a penny. And if he fails to meet the conditions of the trust, you get everything." I felt a wave of vindication wash over me. This was it. The moment of triumph. Tyler had been so sure of himself, so arrogant. But now he would learn that things didn't always go according to plan. His wealth, his future, his dreams, all of it depended on something he could no longer control. But there was more. The lawyer wasn't done. "Oh, and one more thing," she added. "He tried to argue, tried to get a hold of the documents without following the proper procedures. But his mother's wishes were clear. He can't get what he wants without showing he's changed. And let's just say, his reaction wasn't pretty. I could almost hear Tyler's frustration in her voice, and it made the victory all the sweeter. His anger, his sense of entitlement, it was all unraveling. He had been so blinded by greed that he couldn't see what was coming. And now everything was falling apart. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of closure. The revenge was sweeter than I had ever imagined. But this wasn't just about Tyler. It was about me. About reclaiming what had been stolen from me. About proving to myself that I was worth more than what he had made me feel I was. And as I sat there thinking about what had just happened, I realized something. The real victory wasn't in the money. It was in the power to take control of my own life again. And that was something Tyler would never be able to take away from me. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. But as I sat there processing the weight of everything that had transpired, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and reflection. Tyler had been so sure that everything was going to be handed to him. Money, freedom, the life he always wanted. And yet, when the truth of his mother's will had unfolded, everything he had worked for came crumbling down. The realization hit me. I hadn't just beaten him at his own game. I had taken back my life, my dignity, and my future. But even as the feeling of victory settled in, I knew that this was only part of the journey. Revenge, for all its sweetness, wasn't what it seemed in the end. Tyler's world had turned upside down in an instant, and though I had gotten what I wanted, there was an unsettling truth I had to face. Revenge, I realized, doesn't come without its consequences. In the days that followed the fallout, I found myself reflecting more and more on what had led me to this moment. Yes, Tyler had hurt me. Yes, he had treated me like I was disposable, and I had every right to seek justice. But as I watched his life begin to unravel, as I saw the anger and bitterness consume him, I couldn't help but wonder if I was truly satisfied with how everything had turned out. Was this the closure I thought I needed? Was the revenge really worth it? The lawyer had informed me that Tyler's assets were now legally tied up, unable to be accessed unless he could meet the terms set by his late mother. His arrogance, his refusal to change had cost him everything. And though I could feel the bitterness in his every action, every phone call, every confrontation, I knew the game was over. The trust had been activated, and unless Tyler changed, it would be me who held the future in my hands. Yet as the days passed, I began to see the cracks in the armor I had so carefully built. The momentary victory, the sweet taste of retribution, started to fade, leaving behind a lingering emptiness. There was satisfaction, yes, in seeing Tyler squirm in the wake of his own greed, but there was also a recognition that I had become someone I didn't entirely recognize. I wasn't the woman who once loved him unconditionally, the one who had believed in the promises of a happy future. I had turned into something else, someone driven by anger, hurt, and a thirst for justice. And while I didn't regret my actions, I couldn't help but wonder if I had lost a part of myself in the process. I started to focus on what was next, on rebuilding my life. The money, the estate, the trust, it wasn't just about Tyler anymore. It was about me. It was about taking back control and forging a new path. With everything now laid out before me, I had choices. And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't tied to the past. I wasn't defined by what had been. I could start fresh. The divorce, though messy and emotional, was finalized soon after. It was a quiet affair, almost anticlimactic after everything that had happened. There were no dramatic showdowns, no long-winded confrontations. It was just a finalization of something that had been over for a long time. Tyler, predictably, tried to fight the terms of the divorce, but the lawyer's words were clear. The conditions of the trust were non-negotiable. He would have to change or he would never see a penny of his inheritance. And just like that, the power had shifted. Tyler, despite everything, tried to play the victim. He tried to manipulate people into believing he had been wronged, that he was somehow the one who had been betrayed. But deep down he knew the truth. He knew he had brought this on himself. And as the weeks wore on, his life began to unravel. His business ventures, the ones he thought would save him, started to fail. His relationships, strained by his arrogance and self-entitlement, fell apart. He had believed that money and power were all that mattered. But as the days went by, he realized that the very things he thought would give him freedom had trapped him in a cage of his own making. I, on the other hand, was moving forward. Slowly but surely I began to rebuild. I started focusing on things that had long been neglected. my career, my passions, and my own well-being. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the past felt like too much to bear, but I was determined to move forward. No more looking back. No more regrets. There were moments when I found myself reflecting on what could have been. On the life I thought I was going to have with Tyler. The life we had once talked about, full of promises and dreams. But those thoughts were fleeting now. I had learned that nothing in life was guaranteed, and sometimes the path we think we're on isn't the one we're meant to walk. Tyler had been my past, and I had to let go of him to embrace the future. The final blow came when I received a letter from Tyler. It was brief, almost cold, but it spoke volumes. In it, he acknowledged that he had been wrong, that he had taken me for granted, that he had never truly seen me for who I was. He apologized, but it was too late. The apology came after everything had already fallen apart. The money, the inheritance, the relationship, it was all just a distant memory now. In some strange way, that letter gave me closure. Not because I needed his apology, but because it confirmed something I had already known. Tyler was lost. And I had moved on. The final twist came when I decided to invest a portion of my newfound fortune into a project that was close to my heart. It wasn't about the money. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would give back to the community, something that would help others who had been through similar struggles. I had been a placeholder in someone else's life for too long. But now I was the one taking charge. As the dust settled and life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, I realized that revenge wasn't just about making Tyler pay. It was about reclaiming my own life. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal, anger, and confusion, but in the end, it had led me to a place of peace. The true victory was not in seeing Tyler suffer, but in knowing that I had taken control of my destiny. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest revenge of all.